Everyone, of course. Oh, there we go. We're recording. All right, here we go.
Now I'm on the record. I'm Carrie Mullen. I know many of you as well. Hi, it is definitely nice to see faces. I wish I could see bodies with faces someday soon, hopefully. Anyway, I'm the development director at the Land Trust. I work with Katie and Vanessa and Meredith and Sally and everybody.
Yeah, I'm Sally, and I work at Arroyo Hondo Preserve with John and Jennifer, and I'm the Education and Volunteer Program Coordinator. And I'm excited to learn more about the effects of fire and the regrowth.
Let me see. We also have John Warner. He's the preserve manager at Arroyo Hondo. And let me see.
Nice to meet everybody.
And I believe he might have logged off. Okay. And then I'd like to introduce Meredith Hendricks. She is our executive director. So Meredith, would you like to say anything?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you to those who are here right now live with us, as well as those who will watch the recording of this Lunch and Learn. We are learning how to live and be around fire in a different way. And the occasion of the Alisal Fire at our Arroyo Hondo Preserve has given us an opportunity to think differently, to engage in a burn landscape differently, and better integrate living in a wildfire climate into our work as a conservation organization. So thank you all for your time today, and I'm really looking forward to learning more.
Awesome. Thank you, Meredith. So for those of you that may not be familiar with Lunch and Learns, our Lunch and Learn series is basically a variety of presentations and workshops that are free and open to the public. We're going to be hosting them once a month on Wednesdays, usually about this time, 12:30 to 1:30. Most of them are going to be held over Zoom, but we're hoping that as things start to open up again, we'll be able to do more in person. I am going to be including a link in the chat to our events page, so you can take a look at and see kind of what's coming up next. I'll go a little bit more into detail about that at the end. So I'm sending that over. And yeah, I think just before we get started, I think we're all pretty familiar with Zoom by this point, but just in case we need a reminder, I'm going to be muting everyone during the presentation. So if you happen to have any questions that you'd like to ask our speaker, we're going to have a time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to put some questions in the chat. We'll answer them at the end. If you have any issues or problems, feel free to just message me directly. But with that being said, I'd like to introduce our speaker. This is Ethan Turpin. He is the founder and director of the Burn Cycle Project. He's a Santa Barbara native and has been working as an independent video producer and media artist since 1999. His documentaries and exhibits have been shown in film festivals and museums around the world, covering topics like water equality and wildlife. He's fireline trained and a press-credentialed photographer that specializes in fire incidents for various media. So a little bit about the Burn Cycle Project. It started as a design and production service in 2013 to help grow understanding of wildfires, risks, roles, and behaviors. They offer immersive, interactive media experiences for professionals and residents that live in fire-impacted areas. And Ethan collaborates with fire services, scientists, artists, journalists, educators, and just to help the public learn more about it. So we're really excited just to be partnering with him, just because he has had an opportunity to photograph and collect data from the Arroyo Hondo Preserve just after the Alisal Fire that happened in October. I know that a lot of you, for a lot of you personally, Arroyo Hondo is a really special place, and you're excited to get back out there and kind of get an update about what's been going on. And we have a chance to do that today. So thank you so much for being here with us, Ethan. We really appreciate it. But I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I'm really excited to share this with you because it's been such a great time visiting Arroyo Hondo over the last few months and having this opportunity to install time-lapse cameras and really get to know the place through that lens, if you will, literally. And I really appreciate John for being so accommodating. It's just been really amazing to repeatedly visit and see changes. So I'm happy to share that with you a bit today. First, I'm going to start off with a bit of background on the context of what this fits into in terms of projects. And before I start, this is a little bit of what, because the time-lapse process is still ongoing, this is sort of a studio visit I'm inviting you into. My background is in multimedia art. And so you're getting kind of to visit the process in this case. It's less of an art show than a studio visit. So I think I will screen share now if everybody's ready. So here we go. And okay, so a little about the burn cycle project first. As Vanessa introduced, this is about producing experiences to understand wildfire. I really believe that the tools of art and design can help create salient experiences, especially through simulations that help us confront risk in a safe way through our senses, and create an interesting environment for learning, and that's important, as well as interesting. So Arroyo Hondo has been an amazing place to do that. Interestingly, I had scheduled a visit, which would have been my first, and then that was canceled due to COVID shutting down of just access, and so I didn't make it there. And then the Alisal Fire came through, and obviously radically changed things. And so my first visit was right after the fire, and so me getting to know the place has been in step with this regrowth process. So a little more about the burn cycle project first, though. I started it when I was invited to do a show with the Bren School's newly formed Arroyo Fire group, which is there's 4 principal scientists. It's an interdisciplinary group studying wildfire systems and using modeling. And you don't need to understand this conceptual model really too deeply, but it basically what's going on is it's looking at the relationships between natural systems and human systems, the feedbacks within those that include climate change within those natural systems, and the cycle of fire, from ignitions through burning, regrowth, and how that starts over again. But important to understand about the human system is that our attention to fire, our salience, and our consciousness and attitudes about wildfire affect policy and thus affect the natural system itself in different ways. And an interesting thing that Sarah Anderson writes about, who's one of the members of the Arroyo Fire group, is this relationship between salience and risk. And salience we can think of as our attention, in this case, our attention to fire, how much it holds, in our attention in a given time. And so if you imagine that what we're looking at here in this figure is right after a fire there on the left, salience is extremely high. Everyone's thinking about what's gone on. There's been news coverage, things like that. You may have seen the fire, etc. So it puts it at front of mind. But that goes down over time. It also goes down with distance from the fire itself. if you're hearing about it, for instance, in the next town over or whatever, versus seeing it in your neighborhood or something like that. But risk is at its lowest after a fire, because literally what they call the fuels, what I prefer to call vegetation, has burned off and is less likely to burn for a while. And so it literally grows back over time as salience is going down. So as people start to think less about the fire and actually the visual reminders of the fire itself, the burn scar is being erased with new growth. Well, the new growth is the next fire. And that's the paradox that we live in a beautiful place such as the South Coast, is that, we're so attracted to these natural landscapes, and with it comes this risk. And so there's this mental aspect to our relationship to that, and our ability or willingness to confront risk and to be prepared, and also to understand those cycles. And so for me as a wildfire educator, I'm interested in creating bumps in the salience curve that bump back up again to meet risk and relink with risk, so that people can do something about risk, such as clearing vegetation around their homes, things like that. And those are the programs that I'm involved with. There are challenges in communicating the urgency and complexity of fire, because what we're dealing with now is decades of this legacy of fire suppression in the United States, where if we go about an attitude that all fire is bad, you end up just sort of having this procrastination problem with vegetation building up, and it's going to burn. And so is it going to burn in a moderate way or a catastrophic way? And that's what we're dealing with now, this legacy of built up vegetation and overly dense forests. And it's a very complex set of circumstances, but learning to embrace the fact that fire happens, it's part of the natural system, it's part of these places that we love, is an important step. And so actually, before I get to that, I was just going to say that a lot of the collaborations I'm involved with right now are with the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council. I'll show you a flyer at the end. And this brand new program called the Regional Wildfire Mitigation Program, which is really exciting, and taking the largest scale ever really attempted, and a program like this, which is South Coast wide, with several domains. There's a community domain, which has to do with community organizing around the FireWise program in at-risk neighborhoods. There's a landscape domain, which looks at treatment opportunities, and changes in things like green belt zoning, and ag zoning, incentives around those things, and also the built domain, which has to do with incentives around people building more safely, and retrofitting homes to be more safe and prepared for fire. So anyway, there's a lot going on in the changing adaptive relationship to wildfire, beyond simply fire suppression. Not that it's simple. Fire suppression is not simple, but we're kind of adding things to our tool belt. So in terms of the way I interface with the research side, though, in order to improve understanding about wildfire systems, and help scientists communicate what they're learning, there's the inputs. And so we take data and turn that into imagery that expresses that data in a more relatable way. More related to what I'm doing at Arroyo Hondo, in a way, is based on images. So another aspect of what I do is I place fireproof camera housings in places that are about to burn. This is during prescribed burn operations, or on burning operations on incidents themselves. and gather video footage from within the fire itself as it passes over the cameras. And then I create these video installations where people can walk into wildfire, where people can step inside this space that shows a triptych of imagery from those cameras. And started to add time lapse to that, but I'll get to that. So there's this sort of on the ground / what we might call the territory aspect of documenting wildfire that I'm involved with. I have a press pass in California that gives you access to places beyond the roadblocks. And this was during the Thomas fire in Ventura. You can see the way that the power lines have blown up. That was part of the story there. And that's a whole thing, documenting fires as they happen. But really the point from that is to create media that's helpful in understanding wildfire. In order to do that, I get trained. So I have some certifications to be more safe out in fire zones. And this is retrieving one of the boxes from one of the burns. And this is a view from within one of the boxes. Taking that footage then and producing different kinds of exhibits can take different forms. So this is, for instance, this is a piece called Burning House, where we mapped shots from real homes burning onto this structure where people could confront this sort of at scale, as well as embers on trees and stuff. So there's this complex mix of aspects in this interface. We've also done some VR work, and one of the early time-lapse projects I did was on the Arroyo Fire, taking immersive 360 view shots once a month on the San Ynez River, right near the ignition point at White Rock Campground on Paradise Road. And so people would look inside, be able to turn their heads and see inside these 3D views, or I should say 360 views, and sequence through once a month of regrowth. So that's sort of the on the ground experience and way of and perspective on landscapes that burn. But there's also this overhead kind of view, what I would call the map. And it's just a sort of as a sketch. Here's post-fire, post-Testacita fire, Mission Canyon, and regrowth since then. And this relates to one of the main projects I'm involved with called Future Mountain, an interactive fire, water, and climate model with Naomi Teague at the Bren School. This started for me with talking a lot with her about her modeling and creating watercolors, literally to then share with a programmer, and together we created this interactive experience which allows the user to run through decades of actual landscape data from the Southern Sierras. This is largely about looking at changes in snowpack as relates to downstream water supply and how climate change affects that. So you actually can change a warming knob for the climate change scenarios, what climate does to fire, water, forests, soils, etc., and then run different time sequences to see these simulations. So we're interested in doing that for the Santa Barbara Front Country, where we also have model outputs. So we have that data. And I like showing that sort of overview with the on the ground experience of walking to wildfire together to give this rich sense of perspective. on the subject. So here again is the wildfire. This was at the Sage Hen Creek Field Station near Truckee in the Sierras, and it was a neat opportunity to show it outdoors. So you're kind of stepping into a simulated forest fire within a forest, where you can contemplate that in a safe way. I'm going to show you a video from a year ago, almost a year ago. The city of Buellton commissioned a version of Walking to Wildfire. And we'll be doing another one of these soon in May with the Fire Safe Council. And this is what brings us to what I'm working on at Arroyo Hondo. One of the uses anyway for the time-lapse work is to go into a future version of this Walking to Wildfire exhibit. So this next clip shows the time-lapse sequence that comes after you see the wildfire come through, and you see the return. This is an extremely collaborative endeavor to build experiences like this and exhibits like this. So this footage was from my friend Dave Elkins, who has since trained me on installing the time-lapse cameras that he recommended and doing the editing, which is really intensive after the fact. So what you're seeing here is his footage of post-fire landscapes up north. But on the right there is a chamise resprouting process. So I was excited about that because we have that in common in our landscapes, and so that's some of what I'll be showing you that I'm capturing as well. So Arroyo Hondo, this was the day that the Alisal Fire started. Although actually this might have been the second day that I shot this from the highway, and was obviously a devastating day. I want to show you some drone footage of the canyon that a friend and I shot on one of my visits. I brought him with me up there to where I'm installing the cameras. And this hill on the right of the screen, lower right-hand corner, is the upper Outlaw Trail. It goes up there, and that's where the majority of the cameras I've been installing are. Okay, that's the drone shaking. Here's that hill from another angle. So I've got some down below that slope of rocks, 2 down there, and then 2 on the ridge just above that, looking towards West Cielo, so the mountains beyond. Yeah, it looks very stark in these shots, but what is really wonderful to see is the young growth that is actually happening. And so we'll go down and look at that. A map, of course, that you see when you visit Arroyo Hondo, just for a sense of where these things are. So I take the long beautiful commute with my backpack up to the Upper Outlaw Trail. So that loop there is where 4 of the 5 cameras are. And then I've also got one at the very low end of the Lower Outlaw Trail. So at the creek crossing near there. The commute, I keep trying to time how long it takes me to get up there, and I always forget to check my clock at the top because I'm always taking pictures by the time I get to the top, and I'm distracted and enjoying the view and stuff. But I would guess it's about a 40-minute walk or something like that, depending on how much gear I've been lugging with me. One of the first things that was so apparent were these resprouters, the chamise and other species. This, here is chamise. I was impressed talking to our fire marshal, Rob Hazard, who's an amazing guy, who's 5th generation Santa Barbarian who grew up on Refugio Road. He's really one of the main authorities on wildland fire here, and a lot about the fire ecology involved with that. And he was just sort of talking about how amazing chamise is, in that it's sort of, in his words, immortal. He's seen how drought-stressed plants can appear to be withering and dying, and then a fire comes through, and there's this explosion of new growth from its base that comes back and may even kind of, it seems like, revitalize it, and that he knows there's no end to that cycle, that can just continue and continue. Some of you may know more about this certainly than I do. I'm sure you do. And so in the chat, if you have any comments about that, or I'm interested in learning more about all of this fire ecology and botany as well. But it's kind of an amazing thing to observe, and it's kind of a great metaphor for the resilience that we're learning, I think, in living with fire. Another species that we see coming out so much, of course, out there are the wild cucumber, just charging out of the ground immediately after the fire is one of the first things I noticed. And this one is kind of fun. It's been blowing in the wind, and it's gradually drawing a circle around itself as it grows. So this circle is getting wider and wider. And I've seen other species do that as well. As an artist, I appreciate things like that. Here's the wild cucumber taking over this hillside here. And then another one of that hillside a few weeks later, as it starts to cover more. The first flowers I really started to see were these Indian paintbrushes, really startling. So here I am in the tedious task of setting up the cameras. It's quite enjoyable, but these cameras are not designed really for what I'm trying to make them do. They're really designed as camera traps. So they have infrared sensors on them to be triggered by wildlife. But these particular ones made by Bushnell, a certain model has a quote pro time-lapse setting. They have very zoomed in lenses, like a pretty narrow focal length. And so it took some time for me to set up the foreground, middle ground, and backgrounds in each shot that I really wanted, and trying to predict a year out, potentially, I may leave them out for that long, what will change in the composition of the image. And over the course of a day and a year, etc. So here's one of, and I'm using a mount that what the grips on a film set would use, attached to a stake. Took some trial and error to sort out the right mounting gear and stuff like that that would be sturdy. And even with this stuff, they still blow around on that on the top of that ridge because the wind gets really heavy up there. So here's the view from work. This is a nice day at the office sometimes, and you can see that camera set up there. And in the foreground there, a very fast-growing morning glory vine, which is another one of the opportunist species, especially the first year after a wildfire. And then behind me there are night camas, death camas, I believe, which also you see after a fire. But then I don't recall seeing it as much after that. So some of these species are what you'll see the first year, like I said, after fire, and then other species will come in and dominate later, and they're what we see most of the time. So I'm going to show you some video sequences and then also some step-by-step sequences of experiments, really, of shots I've gathered just last Friday. I collected from the cards. So I put the cameras out over the course of a few weeks. So anywhere between like 2.5 to 2 months to a month and a half of sequences, shooting every 15 minutes from 4:30 in the morning to 7:30 at night. So all in all, the cameras I've gathered 13,507 images so far, and they continue to roll. And so here is a few days of this camera's run early on. You'll see it goes into a nighttime infrared mode, which is actually a second lens, so that it changes the view a little bit. There's a lot of flicker, changes over the lighting, cloud cover, etc. during the day. And this is a kind of way of viewing it in terms where you're actually seeing, oh, there was rain just there. You'll see changes in shadows of course of the day, etc. This was cool. This was when we were getting a lot of weather. And what I like about this way of viewing it, and there are different ways of viewing them, is that it shows the wildness. I mean, this camera is up right up on top, and it's getting blown around. It's getting exposed to a lot of intense weather, and I just enjoyed that. It's kind of rough and unrefined still, because these, like I said, these are really fresh batches that I'm experimenting with how I want to sequence them and ultimately display them and use them. They may also end up in some short videos and documentary work around fire stuff too. But so here's another one. This is actually down below near the creek crossing on the lower Outlaw Trail. And this is just one day. That was, you can watch that again. Another one, this is up top also on the ridge, focused on this particular chemise plant. Also one day. This is a more recent day where you can see the blue dick, that flower there. Actually, you can watch that again. Oops, we're gonna watch both again. I watch these over and over again because depending on where you're looking, you're gonna see something different. And there's another shot down below the rock slope, and that was one day. Do that again. So, but really what maybe is more interesting is to see the same time of day, day after day, in order to see the regrowth. So that's a way of compressing time further. Rather than seeing a 15-minute increment, you're seeing a 24-hour increment, the same time of day. So it's less disorienting. You have the same lighting conditioning, and it has an interesting illusion. So I'm just going to step by step through images themselves here at the pace that I choose. So you can see this. You can see the blue dicks growing, as well as the vine. I'm going to go backwards through that again. It'll be very cool to have several months in the can, as we say, so that these sequences will be longer. Oops. Whoa. One second, my presentation got out ahead of itself. Okay, let me get back to where we were. I was asking it to do a lot, looking through those. Okay, so again, this camera is fun because what I wanted to point out was we can see the morning glory climb this this stick in the very middle of the screen. It will wind its way up that, and then you'll see the morning glories blooming towards the end. Here's the morning glories blooming. And then I want to show you the same kind of process in a camera that's right near there, looking more east. It's across a little wash there. Some of you may be familiar with where this is, but that rock slope we were just looking at is just to the left of the screen. And by the way, when I'm choosing these locations, I'm thinking about how to create a sense of a false panorama, if you will, in the video installation. So those, if you recall that box of the Walking to Wildfire installation, since that's one of the places this content may go, giving a sense of space around you, even though there may be gaps. So this would be next to what you just saw. And notice that death cameras on the right there in the foreground. So it's greening up. Yeah, so those were the sequences I wanted to show you, and I'm excited about more that are just as we speak, they're clicking away. And once those sequences are longer, you'll really see a lot of transformation. Here's a greener view of that area as things are going back. And I'm always struck by how dramatic this canyon is. It's just a powerful place to visit. And I just love, kind of like I was alluding to before, the different scales of perceiving places like this, from the macro of individual flowers to this wider view. And with that, I want to thank you guys. I invite you to visit the Burn Cycle Project website, burncycleproject.com, and where there's a lot of different projects on there. You can see some finished work that that this kind of process goes into. And definitely want to invite you to this event that I'm producing with the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council, where there will be a lot of information about Firewise program, a lot of interesting activities and exhibits at Direct Relief, May 6th through 8th. And this is where we'll also be talking about the new regional wildfire mitigation program. That you can see more updates about that on the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council website. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you, Ethan. So we can just
Thank
go
you.
ahead and open it up to any questions. Feel free to you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask anything you'd like.
I'd love to ask a question. This is Christy. Hi, Ethan.
Hi,
Thanks
Christy.
for your presentation here. I was wondering if you worked with any of the botanists involved or restoration ecologists in terms of deciding where you were going to place your cameras.
I haven't been directly, but certainly I take into consideration what species I'm looking at when I place the cameras. So I wanted to get some of that resprouting in the chamise. I wanted to get some manzanita if possible up there on the ridge, and as well as these various wildflowers. So I actually wanted to bounce this back to you guys, in terms of what are we seeing in these images? Because I don't know, given that this is sort of future thinking, I'm setting up not knowing what's going to appear in a month or two. What are we seeing in them?
I guess my question is also a little bit more general for the other folks on here who have known Arroyo Hondo for decades now, and whether or not there's been any cameras on the restoration sites that have been worked on now for 15 years plus,
in terms of the time lapse
to see, to see what's gone on with the ones where all this area has been newly planted over the last 15 years, and then with natives, and then now this fire has come through, and what's happened to those areas. I'd be really curious about that.
Yeah, maybe Sally, you can speak to that. Most of my cameras are higher up than those areas that are being documented, but
that seems really interesting area. John, you've got.
John, yeah, go ahead.
So you've probably been reading that we set up 5 sets of study plots, and several of them are actually in 4 different soil types. So we're doing photo documentation of those areas, and trying to learn how to, whether or not people should intervene in a more, instead of, hey, people don't intervene at all, which is a great message, I think, in general, to, well, if you have this soil type, you need to intervene or don't, depending on soil type, because what I've seen over time is that there's 2 soil types in the canyon that need help in relation to post-disturbance and weeds, taking over the sites. So we're weeding we're weeding most of the restoration sites that were impacted by fire. And early on, what we're seeing is that where there were rhizomatous species underneath all the crown sprouting species, they're coming back just great. And even in the soil types where the weeds have the upper hand, in my opinion. So we're we're going to study that in detail. We are weeding one plot and not weeding another. So to simulate restoration in that regard because of the seed bank that's there. And I'm already moving forward with that in this year's restoration site. And it's been something I've been thinking about because of the last fire, because of thinking about fire even before it happened. So I'm moving forward with planting majority rhizomatous species with, you know, a good representation of everything in that habitat as far as crown sprouting species go, so that if a fire does happen again, that that it won't need much human input in the clay areas, and then also in the cesspit, which is the red soil up the canyon. So we're already I've been observing over time, and now we're adapting to our new planting efforts. We have received quite a lot of money from the insurance to replant some areas, and I'm going to focus those primarily on the areas that were dug up by the dozers. So the dozers dug up all the roots of the plants along the trail goes to the Bear Crossing Trail, you know, from the East Parking Field up to the Bear Crossing Trail. They dug all the roots up. In the other areas that they impacted below the barn, they just scraped the top off and simulated fire, and that's all coming back just fine. I need to take a closer look at that, but we're putting a lot of effort into weeding the existing sites in preparation for future restoration and in helping them come back on their own, you know, leaving those study plots, the one control plot in each soil type alone. So that's sort of what we're doing. And it's just amazing to see how the rhizomatous plants come back. And
John,
it's just beautiful to watch. Yeah.
Are you guys shooting those on a monthly interval, those plots, or how often?
Sally's been shooting them from taking a lot of shots.
More than every month. I mean, at least every 2 weeks. It's been not at least every 2 weeks, sometimes more. And then I get distracted and I get all excited about the ferns, which are really booming. I heard that, well, in the Gaviota fire, that our giant chain ferns came back really, really fast. And so I had them under surveillance because I thought they would come up fast. Seems like all the ferns, and we have a lot of fern species, have survived and just, they're booming. And I am told that the heat of the fire doesn't go so deep into the soil that it hurts the rhizomes. And so they have stored food and they can just shoot back up. And that's similar to things like the wild cucumber, which can just come back using stored food that it has underground. So it's been really, really exciting. And now things are starting to flower, and trying to identify some of these weird, odd fire followers that are flowering. So it's exciting.
So we have folders for each plot, and Sally's starting to put photos, which are, you know, time stamped in each one of the plots. So we have, you know, a possibility of doing something crude like Ethan's doing. We'll see how that goes, but that's our intention, is to both, you know, document and watch it change over time. And we're also doing, you know, transects in each of the plot every 2 months. So counting, you know, what species are in those randomly placed 3 transects per plot, what percent cover it is. We have, you know, a professor at UCSB who's helping us with the study, and she's taken soil samples and measurements of the slope. And so there's an opportunity to learn a lot from those projects, and then you know, to teach that to the public, to the schools. And then we have the self-guided trail program that Sally's working on adapting, you know, to fire ecology in part. So we're working, we're excited, we're learning, and we're going to share that with as many people as we can.
Oh, thanks, you guys. That was really informative. Appreciate it.
I think there's a,
I have a question.
please.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. There was, and I'm just wondering if you were able to find any of the records of the fire followers from the Gaviota Fire, just as a basis of comparison. I think that possibly they went awry. I mean, that I don't know where they are. They were at the Adobe then, but there was that one flower that you showed in the film. It looked like maybe a monocot where it was just a one stalk, central stalk, and it was sticky looking. And I know it's very short lived, but Sally, do you know what that flower was?
Yeah, it's a star zygodine or Fremont's zygodine.
Oh,
and,
yeah, okay.
and it actually is up there
Mhm.
anyway, but I think it seems like the fire, we see it flowering every year, but fires seem to promote the bulb plants. It is a bulb plant and they're more luxuriant and more plentiful blooms after a fire, but it has been there before.
Uh-huh.
But I'm expecting, just like the blue dicks and
Yes.
with other fires, the calicortis, the Mariposa lilies just go nuts. And whether the bulbs are in the soil already and just don't bloom every year, or what, or if the bulbs are dividing or something, but somehow fire seems to stimulate the bulb plants a lot.
Well, thank you.
Or it's a matter of perspective. They're underneath everything else. They're alive. They're just not flourishing because they don't get as much sunlight. And then they also have all that extra nutrition, after the fire. So you'll probably see more flowering after the fire. And it's those death camas are just like crazy how many there are. I've found things that I've never knew were there just because there's nothing, and they're bulbs, they've been there. And some of the blue dicks are, they look like little grasses, and some of them have leaves that are like 2.5 inches wide and 3 feet long. And we counted up to 12 flower stalks on one blue dick, which we were having a contest to see how many we could find. So it seems like, I don't know if it's a different species, but I just think it's a matter of having, maybe being an older plant and having more nutrition. It's really interesting to see. And I don't know if we ever found chocolate lilies, but we found chocolate lilies up on the West Ridge Trail the other day. So
they're not on our plant list. I was surprised. I want to go see those.
Me too.
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a question. I don't want to break up the flower flow, but it's a little different. I was curious in the immersive installations that you showed us, the videos of, there was sound. Is that sound you're actually recording from the fire itself?
Yeah, well, with the fire footage, that is live sound that the camera's microphone is picking up through the housing, because wildfire is so loud that actually comes through. And then I worked with my friend Zach Gill, who's a local musician, to do the soundscapes for the time lapse.
Oh, sure, right.
Yeah, as well.
So what's your guess? I mean, would you imagine that what's coming through in the microphones there is diminished by what, like half? Because I've heard too that, fire is very loud. So I was sort of expected the sound to be louder if that was authentic sound.
It's diminished a lot. I'm not sure how to think about how much, but it is muted by the housing. But yeah, fire is really loud.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw that in the chat that Kenneth had a question here, which I would put out to the group. What soil types are problematic regarding invasive plant species? John, do you have a sense of
Well,
that?
we're not, this is not scientific information, so that will be revealed over the next 3-year period that we're doing the study in. But just from from previous projects that were here before the 2004 fire, when Chris and John were managing, Mary Carroll, who's a local botanist, used to teach at the Botanic Garden in Westmont, and she had several study plots in the Rincon Shale Formation where all the mustard grows. And after the fire, where there were natives, there were no more natives in any of the study plots. So without intervention, I assume that none of those plants were rhizomatous, that because of competition with the mustard, because of the soil type, clay has negative charged particles, so it holds on to nutrients instead of making them available. There's this alleliopathic or kind of toxic thing that the mustard does. So in the Rincon Shale, it's my guess that that makes a really big difference. And then up the canyon, just seeing areas that were disturbed previously by the Hollister family, areas that we restored, and seeing what happens after the fire in that red cesspy soil. It's pretty weedy, but I don't know. I haven't been scientific, and there hasn't been enough time that's passed to have any kind of information about that soil type. So, and then something else I noticed in the Rincon Shale and the clay where the mustard grows is that where it burned completely, and there are these rhizomatous plants that create a community in these open spaces where there's still open spaces that the mustard can come back in, and it's not coming back. And in existing sites that are restoration sites in that soil type, which is where we've done 99% of our restoration work since 2005, the mustard has an opportunity to grow in amongst those other plants in that community, but it doesn't. So there's something protective about the community of plants, whether it's mycorrhizae, whether it's just the root system of the existing plants. I don't know what it is, but it's able to fend off the mustard.
Well, I've
think
noticed
would come up in your
I've noticed that, when you stand up there right at the fence line with the landfill, there's a lot of mustard on the other side of the fence. And I don't know if it's work that you guys have done, but there's not a lot of mustard that's on the Arroyo Hondo side up right there,
No, we haven't done any work up there. So that's all natural. So that would indicate that nothing, based on that small snapshot, that no intervention needs to take place. But that's probably a soil type that doesn't need intervention, but we'll see. We've done 4 soil types, so I don't know if it goes back that far, our experiments.
I had a question. I know we're about out of time, but I did see one fully stalked blooming yucca up right near where the new trail was sort of restored along that rock slope that I shot. It's sort of like under the big boulders in that area. And it seems early. This is a yucca that definitely burned. And I'm curious if that is something that might have been triggered by fire, or what you know about that.
I don't know I know that we've had really warm weather, and there's a lot of nutrients in the soil that could have pushed that forward. That's my guess, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
I have one more question.
I have a question.
Sorry. I'm just wondering about how is the creek? How is the water quality?
Water quality is fine. The two big rains ago, the creek got completely silted, so it would be as if you were looking. There would be no boulders visible at all in the creek from bank to bank. It would look like a road where you just would walk up a road like after that big flow. So the very first rain, a bunch of stuff came down and got washed out, because the plants were holding up all the soil and rocks, that all came down and did a lot of destruction on our infrastructure. But since then, there hasn't been any of that happening, but the creek silted up on the second big rain. And another big rain after that, you're starting to see boulders come back. There's no pools yet. There's maybe little tiny pools, and they haven't been able to find any fish in the creek, unfortunately, all the way up past the cabin. But that'll change, you know, as the plants grow back, as more water comes down, the pools will reform again and it'll all come back. And I'm sure nature will repopulate the streams, and fish will come up from the ocean and repopulate, I hope sooner than later. But they found every other animal. After the first rain, they found everything. And then once the silt came, there was no place for the fish to hide from the high flow. There's no habitat for them. There's no place for them to live. They were all out. So it's slowly coming back.
I know that Rebecca had a question as well.
Yeah, I had a question and a comment. The comment was, well, first of all, I've been a fan of your work for so long, Ethan, and this is so exciting to watch and see it progress over this time. I also really appreciated the comments that you made about embracing wildfire as part of a natural system and how important that is. Agree with you 100%. I wanted to offer a little bit of pushback on the comment that you made about decades of fire suppression and fuel buildup being especially the cause of the big fires, especially in Southern California and Central California. It's for 20 years of research has really illuminated that this is really has to do with the weather and the more extreme weather conditions and the drought than fuel buildup. And I wanted to ask a question. Just I'm so excited about the documentation of the regrowth and focusing on that. We've been doing that a little bit at Forest Watch. And it's so exciting being in a burn area, especially a couple of years out after a fire. And it's so clear that, you know, the landscape is really just regenerated by the fires and not except in places where there's a lot of disturbance. I was wondering, my question was just how long, do you have plans about how long you're going to document the regrowth?
Yeah, well, first, yeah, you're right. I should have clarified that that whole complex relationship between, you know, the causes of extreme wildfire and the size of wildfire and stuff. And you know, these cycles of burning have a lot to do with where you are and when, and it's very different. I think I was speaking broadly about California and the West in terms of fire suppression and that legacy of built up fuels. And prescribed burning is far less effective in chaparral, of course, than in a conifer forest, but some of what I work on is in places like Sagehen is a different kind of fire regime. So you're right about the complexities of that and the relationship with weather and climate stuff. And I'm no expert either. I try to communicate what's known about particular places and communities. But in terms of the length of time I want to have these cameras out there for, you know, I keep having a year in mind as a good round number, and that would be really interesting to see that and mark that. It's possible though that I might move them once other fires start, if I feel like I've gotten enough coverage over the next several months. I'm interested in putting time-lapse cameras in this, you know, right after a fire comes through in a smoking environment, if I have a good position for that and access over the long term. I've learned a ton in this one and this already and on this site, and I think I might be able to apply that to other sites as well. So it really depends on what happens at Arroyo Hondo and also other places as well. But there will be a lot of changes to come in the documentation, that's for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to make sure we're honoring everyone's time, just in case anybody has last burning questions. Let's see. So thank you so much, Ethan. We really appreciate just your insight and expertise and for sharing that with us. And if it's okay with you, if you could just send me that information for the exhibit that's coming up, I can just email that to everybody so we have it, because I'd love to check that out. And then for anyone that's interested, if you check out our events on our website, we are doing a couple more events that we have posted. We will be doing a walk with Bob Mueller about the trees of Santa Barbara at Alice Park on March 2nd. So if you're interested in that, make sure you sign up. We have another Lunch and Learn coming up on March 16th as well that still has a few spots with Landy Coffer talking about herbs and medicinal plants. So thank you guys so much for joining. We really appreciate having you here. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Also, Sally, just real quick, she put a comment that there's a Zoom talk tonight sponsored by the Tenines Natural History Society, Wildfire Effects on Stream and Riparian Systems at 7 o'clock. Anyway, thanks for that, Sally. Thank you all for hosting this, and it was a pleasure to be a part of the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethan.
All right.
Good to see you guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. It's great.